We've come together on this project to create a tool that will be a tool you can turn to, a tool that you as an executive director can use, a tool that your board members could use, or a tool that you can use in helping educate your board members. But this project was put together with the three outlets, the Department of Health, WSSB, and WSSB, to create a tool that you can use in a day-to-day, month-to-month, a year-to-year, from the beginning to 10 or 15 years down the road.
The cast of characters then began with seriousness as these directors shared their stories and their woes among themselves and began to talk to others and explain the problems. In short, they began to make real noise. Why can't the state fund some of this project? Where is the state as far as helping its senior citizens have a good life? These were the types of questions being asked by the directors. As they joined forces, they asked the AARP.
More specifically, we're looking at grants and key points for new directors during this training today. Join me as we talk about your basic and formula grants, as well as some other key reporting documents that are concerned with your grants. If you look at today's objectives, we're going to be talking about the two different types of grants that your organization is awarded when associated with the Wyoming Senior Services Board. That's the basic and formula grants. We're going to talk about how the amounts of each of those grants are derived and how they end up in your organization. We're also going to be looking at the grant application forms and the requirements.
You should go through your bylaws with your board of directors and your executive committee probably at least once every 5 years. Okay. Just to make sure, there's statutes in the state that that change when it comes to governance by nonprofits. It's very important that you keep up on those, and a lot of times, the last couple of times we've updated our bylaws, we've actually sent them to an attorney, had an attorney read through them to make sure that we were in compliance, one, with state statutes, federal guidelines, and to make sure that we weren't, in today's day and age, you gotta make sure you're not discriminatory or use any kind of verbiage that could be taken the wrong way. So it's important that at least once every 5 years, you can send it to the attorney. If you can find an attorney that will do it pro bono, or you have one on your board, or they know someone, it won't cost you a lot. It may not cost you anything, but it's important. And they may not find anything. They may find that your bylaws are within the guidelines and guidances from the federal and state statutes, or that you're well within any kind of new dialogue that needs to happen, but it's important to take a look at that.
A budget is it's like a forecast of what you predict to happen in the next fiscal year, so that you can plan ahead for the next year, so that you can guess how much income or expenses. So if your income is lower than, if you think your income will be lower the next year, you can look at expense line items that you need to try and cut back on. So it's called NOO, that's how you can remember it, NOO. So you take new minus old divided by old. So you take the last year minus the year before and then divide it by the year before. And that gives you a percentage of how much it has increased or decreased. So you can kind of see last year we increased donations by 3%. And I typically do that for 3 or 4 years prior, so I can see if there's a trend in an account.
My role here, unfortunately, is having to have dealt with several different embezzlement cases in our community. We're here to help your organization try to implement better controls and procedures to help prevent this in the future.
One of the reasons that I present these with Mark is I have to review our policies and procedures, internal controls, financial statements and make sure that we don't have any holes in the way that we do things, make sure that we can prevent embezzlement and fraud here at Converse County Bank. For a little bit of background, every year about 2/3 of small businesses and nonprofits fall victim to some level of fraud. That could be a few $100s, few $1,000s to several $100,000 and even millions of dollars. In the past 4 or 5 years, just in our community with nonprofits, we've ourselves found out about 4 or 5 embezzlement/fraud instances. And as we'll talk about later, those are just the ones that we've found out about. Most of these go unreported, and even more of those undetected for several years. Typical nonprofit loses between 5% and 7% of revenues annually as a result of fraud. That's not every nonprofit every year, but across the nation, fraud accounts for losing 5 to 7% of revenues annually. The types of fraud that can be perpetrated can either be internally or externally. Today, we're focused more on fraud and embezzlement that occurs internally, but it's also important to be aware of fraud that can happen externally. And that's generally from a third-party provider, some sort of relationship that you have with a third party. The vast majority of internal fraud, which is what we're focused on today, is committed by longtime trusted employees. I would say 95 to 100% of the time that we get involved, the first thing that we hear is, never would have expected it. The guy or girl has worked for us for a long time, 15, 20 years. They've always done a good job. They've always been honest. Never would have suspected it. And that makes sense. If it was someone that was new, someone that you didn't trust, you'd probably be paying more attention. When you get comfortable with someone, begin to trust them, then you don't pay as much attention, and that's when things can fall through the cracks. There's big holes in internal controls, and there's not a segregation of duties. You're having one employee perform multiple duties, so there's not the checks and balances that are necessary to detect and prevent fraud and embezzlement.
Revisions happen because sometimes you get the budget all worked out and at the beginning of the year, but who knows what's going to happen in the coming year. A good example of that is with COVID, and that really disrupted a lot of budgets when there weren't in center participants. If people couldn't come to the centers, so that disrupted a lot of the budget that was originally scheduled. So there's always a chance for revisions. And so this is all covered. If you want the policy on this, just go to the Wyoming Health website. It's www.health.wyo.gov. And on that website, you'll find under the Aging Division, you'll find the WSSB board. And under that, you'll find the policies that cover the different situations like this, like revisions. So revisions, there's 2 types of revisions. One revision is a revision that's more than 25% of the category. Now there's some question on this, is if that was more than 25% of the category or more than 25% of the total budget. And under the Wyoming rules and regulations, we determined it's more than 25% of that category. So of course the categories would be on your budget, it'd be the different areas like personnel, travel, equipment, consumables, supplies, and other. And then another important thing to remember is I talked about doing the different types of revisions. If the revision's over 25%, then a request needs to be submitted for approval to the Wyoming Senior Services Board. And if the request is under 25%, wouldn't really be a request, but it just would be a notification that that is being done. It still needs to come to the board for their attention, but it's not really a request. It's just a notification that you're going to move some money around, and then that would help keep us informed when we go over your next quarterly report that that there has been a change made, and so we know that money is that there's sufficient money in a category if there was a change made. And that would prevent overspending if a change is made and we weren't aware of it, and we thought you had plenty of money in the budget, and it turned out there wasn't. If it wasn't recorded, or if it wasn't entered in that quarter report, then we wouldn't be aware of the change, and there may be an overspending that happens because the correct amount wasn't entered in that column.
This training module program would have helped me tremendously because, like I said, I didn't even know, number one, even what WSSB was. I didn't know what that stood for. I didn't know it was a state-funded grant. And so just being able to look at these modules would have been a tremendous help to me.